We live in this era where, the mechanics of success are they're more visible than ever.
Right.
But the actual substance of that success, well, it's never really felt more hollow, right? Like, if you look at the digital landscape today, the ultimate goal across almost every industry is just scaling.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fast. As fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, exactly. You find the right algorithm, you hit the right trend, the metrics just explode, and boom, you are crowned a winner. We are completely obsessed with visibility right now.
We really are.
Yeah.
But, looking at the source materials we're unpacking today, there is this chilling counter-narrative that comes up.
Yeah.
What if the exact strategies we trust to, quote-unquote, win this digital game are actually invisibly killing our long-term impact?
That's the core question for you listening today. And the tension here is really between the illusion of reach and the reality of endurance.
Right, because we're constantly pressured to build things that look massive on the surface.
Yeah.
But when you examine the actual, the underlying architecture of that growth, it's often incredibly fragile.
So fragile.
Yeah, we measure our worth by the speed of our expansion, and we just completely ignore whether or not the foundation can actually hold that weight.
Which brings us to our deep dive today. To understand the physics of that fragility, we are pulling apart a pretty profound, incredibly dense manifesto.
It's very dense, yeah.
It's a text on leadership, ministry, and legacy titled, The Algorithm Doesn't Build Legacy, People Do.
No.
And we're pairing this text with this really stunning visual source.
It's a beautiful image.
It really is. It's an image of a lush, vibrant valley. You've got this winding river at the base, towering waterfalls cascading down the steep mountainsides, and then these intricate, carefully cultivated terrace rice paddies just stepping down the hills.
And the contrast there is key. The contrast between the relentless speed of the algorithm in the title, right, and the ancient, deliberate cultivation in this image, that's the perfect entry point for us today.
Yeah, so our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this radical alternative operating system for leadership. We are exploring why sustainable influence isn't built on reach, but on relationships.
Exactly.
And how a leader actually transitions from being a mere shadow in their field to becoming a true shepherd.
Now, before we really dismantle these concepts for anyone listening, it's crucial to understand the foundation of the source text.
Good point.
The author's frameworks are deeply rooted in Christian theology. So the text frequently references the leadership model of the historical Jesus, the organizational strategies of the Apostle Paul, various scriptural metaphors, things like that.
Right, and we should be clear, our objective here is not to preach,
No, not at all. We are not advocating for a specific theological worldview. We're looking at this purely through an analytical lens.
Impartial.
Right, impartially. We're examining the fascinating, time-tested leadership mechanics, the organizational psychology, and the human formation frameworks that the author is deriving from these ancient texts.
Because the goal is just to see how these principles challenge our modern assumptions about scale, right?
Exactly.
So diving in, I look at the corporate world, the influencer economy, even the nonprofit sector, and the great illusion the text describes is completely pervasive.
Oh, it's everywhere.
The digital world has trained us to measure worth entirely by numbers. Followers, impressions, clicks, views.
Downloads.
Yeah, downloads. And the text doesn't shy away from this. It tackles the metrics head on.
It does. The author draws this really sharp line between indicators of attention and indicators of transformation.
Right.
Impressions and clicks, they're just currencies of digital attention.
Yeah.
They tell you that a screen was active while your content was displayed. That's it.
Right. Someone scrolling past.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The illusion occurs when we substitute those metrics for what the text calls fruit.
Fruit. Right.
Yeah, fruit in this agricultural metaphor, it represents actual human transformation, like a real change in character, behavior, or capability.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how the text frames the danger of that visibility.
Mm-hmm.
It argues that a person can be seen by hundreds of thousands of people online and yet shape absolutely no one deeply.
That's a terrifying thought for anyone building a platform today.
Truly.
You could spend a decade, right, accumulating millions of views, and then when the server shuts down or the app goes out of style, you leave zero actual legacy.
None at all. The text frames this as a clash between two fundamentally different sets of questions. Culture, meaning our modern, digitally driven society, it asks two primary questions.
Which are?
What works right now, and how fast can we scale it?
Right, the speed obsession.
Exactly. Contrast that with what the text calls the kingdom questions, which are entirely focused on endurance.
I love this part.
Yeah, the alternative framework asks what lasts, and Can it endure the fire?
Can it endure the fire? That is so evocative.
It implies that pressure, crisis, and time are the only true tests of a structure. Fast growth often produces these incredibly brittle organizations and shallow communities.
Because there are no roots.
Exactly. When a crisis hits, the community splinters because there's no relational density holding it together. Slow growth produces roots.
Let's ground this in the visual source we have. I keep looking at this image of the valley with the terraced rice paddies and the waterfalls.
It's so detailed.
It is. And if we map the modern digital mindset onto a landscape, a viral video or a massive growth hack is essentially a flash flood.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. It's massive, it's sudden, it completely overtakes the terrain, and it commands everyone's attention. But a flash flood is destructive.
Highly destructive. It washes away the topsoil.
Yes. It doesn't soak into the earth to nourish anything deeply. It just evaporates and flows away almost as quickly as it arrived. So the text is forcefully arguing for the rice paddy approach.
Which perfectly mirrors the heavy use of agricultural imagery in the source text. Specifically, they cite Mark chapter 4, where the author discusses the parable of the seed growing secretly.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, true growth, in this framework, is hidden before it's ever visible. The seed goes into the dirt, and for a really long period, there's absolutely no external evidence that anything is happening.
But, okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
I'm looking at this from the perspective of, say, a startup founder or a mid-level manager whose boss wants to see quarterly growth.
Sure.
If I walk into a board meeting and say, hey, everyone, I'm ignoring our engagement metrics this quarter because I'm focusing on hidden root growth, I'm getting fired.
Oh, without a doubt.
The pressure to produce the flash flood is immense.
It is. And the friction you're pointing out is exactly why the author calls the modern system a master rather than a tool.
Wow, a master.
Yeah, modern corporate strategy demands the flash flood because it is addicted to the excitement of the moment. The board wants the spike in the graph.
They want the dopamine hit.
Exactly. But the text asks us to look at the aftermath. What actually remains after the emotional wave of viral campaign passes.
Yeah.
Usually it's just drift.
Yeah.
And this is where the waterfalls in our visual source are such an excellent representation. They represent what the text calls living water, or spiritual energy and resources.
Okay, I see that.
Notice how the water in the image doesn't just crash wildly through the valley. It's captured. It feeds into those slow, deliberate, human-made terraces.
And those terraces, they don't just happen. They take generations to carve into a mountainside by hand.
Back-breaking labor.
Yeah, they require so much intention.
And those terraces represent the structures of discipleship, right? The intentional, highly inefficient relational frameworks that capture energy and use it to produce an enduring harvest over time.
So the flash flood wastes the water, but the terraces steward it.
Exactly. A beautiful way to put it.
Okay, so if the flash flood of the algorithm is the wrong approach, the text points to a historical case study of the right approach, which brings us to the strategy of Jesus.
Right?
And frankly, looking at it through a modern strategic lens, his approach seems completely counterintuitive.
It really is the ultimate rejection of the strategy of spectacle.
Mm.
The text emphasizes that Jesus had access to crowds. He frequently preached to multitudes.
Right, he had the number.
He had the metrics.
Yeah.
But he never measured the success of his movement by public metrics. His primary strategy, the actual engine designed to carry his legacy across millennia, was this hyper-focused, agonizingly slow investment in 12 men.
The text pulls out a very specific, almost shocking example of this from John chapter 6, verse 66.
Yes, a critical moment.
It's a moment where his teachings become incredibly challenging. And it says many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him.
Right.
If we map that onto today's digital economy, that is a catastrophic public relations disaster.
Complete disaster.
You just lost a massive percentage of your subscriber base because your content was too demanding.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, any modern analytics consultant would look at that moment and declare the venture a total failure.
Yeah, they'd be panicking.
They'd advise immediate rebranding. Soften the message, run an apology campaign, win back that market share. But in the alternative economy the text describes, that moment wasn't a decline.
What was it?
It was a clarification. The crowd was never the goal. The goal was faithful formation.
I hear that. I really do. But I want to push back a little on the premise that The algorithm is inherently destructive to this goal.
Okay.
Because isn't a digital platform just the modern equivalent of standing on a mountain and preaching to a multitude?
That's a common argument, yeah.
Like you have a message, you believe it has value, so you find the biggest megaphone available. Why is the mountaintop considered a valid tool in antiquity, but the algorithm is framed as this huge danger today?
It's a great question. The distinction the text makes is deeply aligned with media ecology. Specifically, Marshall McLuhan's concept that the medium is the message.
Okay,
The
right.
platform itself, the code, it's neutral. It is a tool. The danger emerges when the platform begins to dictate your theology, your tempo, and your priorities.
Right.
A mountaintop does not demand anything of the speaker. An algorithm does.
Okay, let's play that out for the listener. What exactly does the algorithm demand?
It demands frequency, it demands polarization because, outrage drives engagement,
Oh, absolutely.
and it demands that you constantly protect and polish your image. The digital environment has this set of implicit commands. Be everywhere, be impressive, never show weakness unless it's highly curated vulnerability.
Oh, the curated vulnerability. That is so true.
Right, and the text argues that these implicit commands directly contradict the core tenets of the leadership framework it's advocating.
So if the algorithm says be everywhere, the framework says what?
The framework says abide, meaning be deeply rooted and physically present in one place.
Okay.
If the algorithm says protect your image and build your brand, the framework says take up your cross,
Yeah.
which implies this willingness to suffer loss, to be misunderstood, and to sacrifice public standing for private integrity.
That is a massive shift.
It is.
Hmm.
When a leader allows the megaphone to become the master, they stop forming people and they just start performing for them.
Performing instead of forming, that distinction requires such a huge shift in the identity of the leader, because knowing that you need a slow agricultural strategy is useless if you don't have the actual character to execute it.
Exactly. The strategy means nothing without the character.
Which is where the text introduces this transition from a shadow to a shepherd. And the etymology here is just fascinating.
It really is. The metaphor of a shadow is incredibly precise. Just think about the physical properties of a shadow.
Okay.
It has an outline. It occupies space. But it has absolutely no internal substance. It is entirely dependent on an external light source and the shape of whatever object that happens to be standing behind.
So a leader operating as a shadow is entirely defined by external forces.
Exactly.
They're mimicking the personalities of successful people they see online, or they're hiding behind the bureaucratic systems of their corporation. They are reflecting the immediate demands of their followers rather than actually leading them.
Yes. They have visibility, but no internal weight. And if the light source shifts, say the trend changes or the company restructures the shadow, completely changes shape or just disappears altogether.
Wow. Contrast that hollow existence with the text's definition of a shepherd. Because in this biblical imagination, a shepherd is not a showman on a stage.
No, not at all.
The text refers to them as a keeper of souls.
Which requires a fundamentally different skill set than managing a brand. A shepherd must possess intimate, localized knowledge. They have to know the specific terrain where their flock is grazing.
Yeah.
They have to know the individual voices and temperaments of the sheep.
And they have to understand the external threats. The text mentions the danger of wolves. In a modern context, that isn't just a competitor.
Right.
It could be burnout, a toxic corporate culture, or even the distraction of the digital noise we just talked about. A shepherd has to actively protect their people from the environment.
Yes, and they also have to understand the necessity of rest.
That's huge.
A shadow leader, driven by metrics, you're going to drive their team relentlessly, 24/7, just to hit a target. A shepherd knows that if you drive the flock too hard, they will literally die.
Right.
The pace of a shepherd is dictated by the most vulnerable member of the flock, not by the demands of the market.
Which completely redefines our standard metrics of success.
Completely.
Success is no longer market domination. It isn't applause. Success becomes stewardship. It becomes the quiet, unglamorous faithfulness of building people up rather than using people to build an empire.
But the friction there, and this raises an important question, the digital world rewards the shadow instantly and punishes the shepherd with obscurity.
Yeah, obscurity is the ultimate fear today.
Exactly. And the text issues a grave warning regarding that exact friction. In a digital ecosystem, image can be polished infinitely faster than character can be formed.
So true. You can't just purchase the aesthetic of wisdom.
You can. You buy the lighting, you hire the copywriter, and you project the image of a seasoned, empathetic leader in a matter of days.
But you cannot bypass the time it takes to grow fruit.
No, you can't.
The author references the warning in Matthew 7 that trees are known by their fruit. And I think about this in the context of the constant cycle of leadership implosions we see today.
Oh, it's nonstop.
Every week, there's a new expose about a charismatic startup founder or a massive influencer whose entire empire just collapsed overnight.
And the root cause is almost always the same. The public image vastly outpaced the private character.
Yeah.
They decorated a dead tree with ornaments to fool the public. But eventually, the internal rot caused the entire structure to collapse under its own weight. Leadership without the substantive character of a shepherd is structurally unstable.
Going back to our visual source, if you look at the architecture of the small houses built into the rice terraces,
Yeah, look at those.
they aren't glass skyscrapers erected in a few months to dominate the skyline. They were small, sturdy, and deeply integrated into the earth. They're built from local materials to withstand the specific monsoons and heat of that valley.
That is the architecture of trust.
Yes.
The text argues that trust is built entirely in hiddenness. It's built in the decisions you make when no one is checking your work. It's the integrity of your private life.
The public visibility of those houses is just the roof. The foundation goes deep into the mud.
Now, if a leader successfully makes that internal transition, if they actually cultivate the deep foundation of a shepherd, the immediate problem they face is capacity.
Time and energy, right.
Exactly. If you drop your ego and genuinely start caring for the souls of your team, your calendar will become a nightmare. Everyone will want your time. How do you manage that without burning out?
Well, this is where the framework refuses to be anti-growth. It doesn't romanticize staying small forever. It just demands a different mechanism for growth, which the text calls kingdom multiplication.
The shift from addition to multiplication requires changing the deepest question a leader asks themselves.
Which is usually about reach.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. The standard question is, how far did I travel?
Uh,
Or how many people heard my keynote? The text demands a new question. Who was formed because I walked this road?
who was formed? It's the difference between gathering a crowd and raising an army.
Yes.
The text uses the Apostle Paul's instruction to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2.2 to illustrate this. Paul says, "What you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also."
That is a four-generation vision of leadership transfer originating from a single relationship.
4 generations. Walk us through that.
Well, Paul's the first generation, Timothy's the second, the faithful people are the third, and the others are the fourth.
Wow.
This creates a massive paradigm shift regarding when a leader's job is actually finished.
I love this concept because it completely destroys the modern communicator's mindset.
It really does.
We think the job is done when we hit publish on the podcast or step off the stage after the presentation. But the text argues that ministry or leadership is not complete when a message is heard.
Not at all.
It's only complete when the person listening is transformed enough to steward that same knowledge and effectively pass it on to someone else.
And to execute that practically, the author includes this incredibly detailed operations manual in the appendices. It features a 4-level leadership transfer model.
Yes, let's get into this.
This is how you physically move someone from a passive consumer to an active multiplier.
Let's break this model down because this is where the theory really hits the concrete of a modern workplace.
Yeah.
So level 1 is I do, you watch.
Right. This is the baseline of mentorship. It is
Right.
pure observation. The leader is doing the heavy lifting, executing the strategy, or handling the crisis. And the apprentice is simply in the room absorbing the environment, the decision-making process, and the unspoken culture.
Okay, that makes sense. Then level 2 shifts the dynamic slightly. I do, you assist.
Here, the apprentice is actually brought into the workflow. The stakes are still relatively low for them, but they're feeling the weight of the actual work under your direct, constant supervision.
So they're getting their hands dirty.
Exactly. They're handling the logistics where you handle the strategy.
Okay, then we hit level 3, which feels like the most dangerous pivot for a controlling leader.
Oh, absolutely.
Level 3 is you do, I guide.
The danger is real because the responsibility has now transferred. The apprentice is in the driver's seat. They are leading the meeting or drafting the critical communication.
And what's the leader doing?
The leader becomes the safety net and the sounding board, offering course corrections after the fact rather than dictating the actions in real time.
Which brings us to the final hurdle, level 4. You do, I release. And
Yeah.
I look at corporate culture, and the concept of release seems almost impossible. A successful shepherd, according to this text, is not threatened by their apprentice becoming stronger. They actually rejoice when the person they mentored surpasses them.
Because a shadow leader holds on to control, right? Their entire identity is tied to being the indispensable genius in the room. If
Exactly.
someone else could do their job better, they feel erased. But a shepherd's identity is tied to the health and expansion of the flock. Releasing a trained leader is the ultimate victory.
It's the whole point.
Exactly. The text challenges the reader with a brutal diagnostic question. If your ministry or your organization doubled in size, but not in leaders, would that be growth or dysfunction?
Let's actually visualize that for a second. If your revenue doubles or your audience doubles, but every single critical decision still has to cross your desk, that is not growth.
No, it's not.
That is a ticking time bomb of systemic collapse. You haven't built an organization. You have built a massive fragile dependency on your own nervous system.
That's a great way to say it. And to avoid that collapse, the text demands a shift from content creation to connection creation.
Right.
If you're only adding followers, you're managing a crowd. If you are reproducing leaders, you are building a legacy capable of outlasting your own lifespan.
But reproducing leaders requires an intense amount of proximity. You can't mentor someone through a broadcast.
No, you really can't.
Which brings us to the most urgent critique the text offers regarding our current cultural moment: the ministry of presence in a distracted world.
The author describes the modern human condition with this devastating phrase. They say we are overexposed and undernourished.
Overexposed and undernourished, that hits hard. We have infinite access to information about everyone's lives, yet we have never felt more isolated.
Right.
We are starving in a grocery store.
Because we have confused the transmission of data with the experience of connection.
Unpack that difference.
Information can be transmitted instantly. I can send a strategic vision document to 100,000 employees in a fraction of a second. But transformation, the actual changing of a human heart or mindset, requires proximity.
Right. Being there.
Exactly. A broadcast informs, a book informs. But discipleship, mentorship, true shepherding, that forms.
A viral video can reach 1 million people, but a shepherd knows the names, the fears, and the specific histories of the people in front of them.
Yes.
The text points back to the historical Jesus to define this ministry of presence. He didn't execute his mission from a remote, detached headquarters.
His authority was incarnational. He physically entered the space of the people he is leading. He ate meals with them, which in that culture was an intimate declaration of acceptance.
Yeah.
He touched individuals who were socially and religiously categorized as unclean. He wept at grave signs. He experienced the physical and emotional friction of the human condition.
And what does that mean for you, the listener, today? It means you have to actually be willing to endure the slow, imperfect, highly inefficient work of accompanying people.
Exactly.
You have to stay in the room when the crisis hits and the metrics look terrible. The text states beautifully, presence communicates value. It says, you matter enough for me to stay.
And the challenge the text issues to the modern church, and really by extension to any community builder, is to stop blindly adopting the world's methods of mass communication without analyzing the fruit those methods produce.
Because the digital algorithm is designed to produce consumers.
Exactly. It produces audiences who demand to be entertained.
And if you build your entire organizational structure around attracting an audience, the exact second you stop entertaining them, or the moment your content becomes too demanding, like that John 6:66 moment we discussed earlier, they will abandon you for a more entertaining option.
They're gone. Consumers consume, disciples reproduce.
That distinction becomes existential when we factor in the rise of AI and automated content generation, which the text explicitly warns about.
Oh, it does. We're entering an era where generating infinite, highly polished content costs $0 and takes zero time.
It's wild.
A machine can write 10,000 theological blog posts or leadership newsletters in an hour.
So if that's the reality, what retains value when content is infinite?
The human element, authenticity, physical, undeniable presence. Technology can accelerate production, but it cannot form a soul.
Right.
In a sea of automated noise, the life that multiplies is the life that is deeply rooted and faithfully present with a specific, localized group of people.
Okay. All of this philosophy and historical analysis is deeply compelling. But I know the people listening to this deep dive right now.
Yeah.
They are currently looking at a calendar filled with Zoom meetings, an inbox with 1,000 unread emails, and a team that needs direction today.
Right. They need the practicals.
They're asking, how do I practically execute this? And the author anticipates this entirely. The text includes an extensive Integrated Leadership Operating System, or ILOS. Let's dig into the actionable blueprint.
The author understands that a leader cannot multiply peace or order if their internal world is in chaos. So the first practical framework is the mental bandwidth audit.
Oh, I love this one.
Fragmented anxious thinking produces reactive, fragmented leadership.
Yeah, the mechanics of this audit are so helpful. You literally sit down and write out the top recurring thoughts, anxieties, or open loops that are constantly spinning in the background of your mind.
Get all out.
You get the clutter out of your head and onto paper. Then you ruthlessly sort every single item into one of three categories: action, prayer, or elimination.
This forces immediate clarity. If you're stressing over a project deadline, the question is there a physical, concrete action I can take right now to advance this?
Right. Yes, it goes into the action bucket and gets scheduled.
Exactly. If the anxiety is over something entirely beyond your control, say the outcome of a medical test or a macroeconomic shift, the text directs you to place it in the prayer bucket.
And even if you don't operate from a theological framework, the psychological mechanism here is profound.
It really is.
It's the active, intentional release of an uncontrollable burden rather than passively allowing the anxiety to run your nervous system.
Precisely. And the third bucket, elimination, is perhaps the most difficult.
Oh, for sure.
This is for the noise, the comparison, the hypothetical arguments you're having in your head. With the rival on social media,
We've all been there.
you must identify it as useless and actively delete it from your cognitive hard drive.
This audit connects directly to the next tool in the blueprint, which is total capture. The author observes that leaders are perpetually exhausted, not just by the work they're doing, but by the false burdens they're carrying.
Yeah. And a false burden is a responsibility, an expectation, or an assignment that was never actually given to you by your mandate, your job description, or in the context of the text, by God.
So where do they come from?
It's an expectation you absorbed from the culture.
Like, I need to launch a podcast because my competitor just did.
Exactly.
I need to solve every single interpersonal squabble in my department personally. These are false burdens. Total capture is the discipline of emptying your mind of these unassigned weights to create the necessary spiritual and cognitive space for actual discernment.
Because if your mind is full of false burdens, you cannot hear the quiet voice of the actual assignment.
Wow. Okay. Once a leader has cleared that internal space, the challenge shifts to managing external demands.
This is where the Kingdom Prioritization Grid is deployed. This framework forces you to categorize every single task on your calendar into three distinct buckets.
Bucket 1, multiplication tasks. These are the highly relational, slow activities that actually raise up leaders' mentoring sessions, deep strategic planning, long-form discipleship.
Right.
Bucket 2, maintenance tasks. These are the administrative duties that keep the lights on and the payroll running.
Essential, but not multiplying.
Exactly. And bucket 3, distraction or noise. Tasks with zero long-term value.
Now, the rule the author attaches to this grid is uncompromising. You must eliminate or delegate 80% of your distraction tasks immediately.
80%.
Yes. And more importantly, you must schedule your multiplication tasks first before anything else touches your calendar.
Because if you don't aggressively protect the time to mentor the apprentice, the maintenance task will expand like a gas to fill every available hour of your week. The urgent will always assassinate the important.
So true. To defend that schedule, the author provides a gatekeeping tool called the Next Obedience Filter.
Okay, tell us about that.
Before you agree to a new meeting, a new project, or a new speaking engagement, you must process the request through a series of rigid questions.
Questions like, does this align with my primary assigned mission?
Right.
Is this actual obedience to my core calling, or is it a distraction disguised as an opportunity? I have to pause on that phrase.
It's a heavy one.
Distraction disguised as opportunity. That is the autopsy report of so many burned out, failed leaders. We destroy our capacity by saying yes to seemingly good things that take us entirely off our assigned path.
We really do. The final question in the filter brings it all back to the core premise. Will this task multiply others, or will it merely consume me?
If it only consumes you, the answer must be no.
To force the reader out of theoretical agreement and into tangible action, the text issues a concluding directive, the immediate obedience challenge.
The author states bluntly that when clarity is present, delay is disobedience.
Powerful statement.
Waiting for the perfect time to implement these changes is an illusion. The challenge is to identify one delayed act of leadership, whether it's initiating a mentorship, having a hard corrective conversation, or resigning from a commitment that is a false burden, and execute it within 24 to 48 hours.
The entire architecture of the text builds to this single point of execution, the shift from a passive consumer of inspiring leadership theory to an active embodiment of a shepherd.
It's where the rubber meets the road.
As the author notes in the closing pages, the future will not be shaped by the leaders who simply accumulated the most knowledge. We all have access to infinite information.
I'm drowning in it.
The future belongs to those who apply what they know with faithful, relational consistency over decades.
You have to actually get your hands in the mud and build the terraces. Well, we have traversed a massive amount of conceptual territory today. We started by dismantling the great illusion of digital metrics, recognizing that a million views might just be a flash flood that leaves no lasting nutrients in the soil.
Exactly.
We explored the slow, hidden agricultural reality of true growth. We unpacked the painful identity shift required to stop operating as a hollow shadow and begin bearing the weight of a true shepherd.
We broke down the mechanics of the multiplication engine, realizing that success isn't gathering a crowd, but reproducing leaders through the four-level transfer model.
And we laid out the stark realities of the Ministry of Presence, utilizing tools like the mental bandwidth audit and the prioritization grid to survive an era of automated noise.
It really is a complete inversion of how we are taught to measure the value of our lives. But before we conclude, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought that extends the logic of this framework to its ultimate conclusion.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have focused intensely on building a legacy that outlasts your direct involvement. But consider the deepest implication of the agricultural metaphor. What if the true measure of your life's work isn't validated by the generation you directly mentor?
Oh, wow.
What if the ultimate legacy is planting a seed in a garden you will never personally live to see bloom? Are you willing to pour the water of your presence into the soil today, trusting entirely that a harvest you will never receive credit for will sustain someone else tomorrow?
That is the ultimate dividing line between building for the algorithm and building for eternity. So leave the flash flood behind. Start carving the terraces. Take that immediate obedience challenge today. Find the one thing you know you need to do and do it before the sun goes down. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.